Welcome to another episode of the We Have a Meeting podcast. Today we're joined by a very special guest. I don't often have to do this, but there's so many accolades I've had to write a little list out here. So we're joined by an innovative and inspirational leader, a best-selling author, an award-winning author, a founder of the leadership consultancy, the Dog's Body Group, a speaker, a podcaster, and a columnist for Management Today and Forbes. We're joined by none other than Chris Hirst. Chris, how are you? And thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm very good, thank you. Happy New Year to everybody.
Yes, Happy New Year, Happy New Year. So, for anyone who's not aware of your work, it's probably a tough question. It's one that I don't always like being asked. But how would you summarise yourself and perhaps the problem that you solve?
With the book, do you mean?
With the book, with your experience?
Oh gosh, I really don't like answering questions like this. So I started my career. Actually, I did a degree in engineering. So my first job was in a glass factory in St Helens. My first sort of postgraduate job, let's say, was in advertising. So I spent all of my career in marketing services of some description, and most recently, I was the global CEO of Havas Creative Group, which is a big global marketing services business. And I suppose, let's say 4 years ago, I published my first book, which was No Bullshit Leadership, which was a bit of a, it was an idea that just came to me really one morning, and I thought, I wonder if I could write a book about that idea. I wonder if that's a sort of a short article, a long paper, or a book, and I'm not going to know until I sit down and see whether I can write more than. First of all, let's see whether I can write more than 1,000 words, and let's see if I can get to 5,000, and let's see if I can get to 10,000, and go from there. Really, and it's done pretty well. It's done pretty well since it came out. I'm just dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the second book, which will be out later this year. And I'm currently on gardening leave. So there we go. That's me at the moment.
Wonderful. So the book, I've read the book. I actually messaged you on LinkedIn to say how much I was enjoying it. It was my companion on many a dog walk. And we were talking just before we came on. The title is almost a component that sells it, because there are so many leadership books. I've downloaded so many on Audible, and you start listening to the first two chapters and think, what even is this? So, No Bullshit Leadership. If you were to sum it up against those other books out there, what makes it stand out?
Well, the sort of organising thought of the book is that leadership's difficult but not complicated, and yet there is a huge industry, and it really is an industry. I call it in the book the leadership industrial complex, that has a vested interest in selling us this snake oil, if you like, that leadership is an incredibly complicated thing. In fact, potentially quite an elitist thing, that it's this secret knowledge available only to a chosen few, and you can only gain access to that knowledge if you hand over hundreds, thousands, sometimes millions of pounds to the sort of leadership industrial complex. And we're all familiar with them. This is business schools, training programs, management consultancies, off-site books, dare I say, training programs, etc. And the problem with this bullshit is that I really do believe it creates two quite baleful real-world consequences. The first is that it inhibits people who are already in leadership positions, and we can come and talk about who those people are in a minute if you like, because by my definition there's an awful lot of those people. It inhibits people who are already in leadership positions from fulfilling their potential. And secondly, potentially even worse, it excludes whole swathes of society from believing that leadership is ever something that they could aspire to. And both of those things are bullshit. And so really the book is about wiping away that bullshit, and being clear, I think, like I said, that it is difficult. I can't help you with that, but it isn't complicated, and perhaps I can help you with that bit.
Okay, so it sounds like you're perhaps, unless I'm hearing this wrong, you're alluding to maybe that anyone is capable of being a leader.
I think anyone is capable of being a leader. I really do think that, and sometimes people kind of roll their eyes a bit at that, and so I'll clarify, because I'm not some sort of like crazy idealist. What I think is that if you're going to write a book about leadership and leaders, I thought to myself, well, I need to define what a leader is first of all, and I need to define what leadership is. And so for me, a leader is anybody that has people they're responsible for. So, but whether that be 4 people or 40,000 people, whether that be, a ward in a hospital, whether that be a department in a school, a FTSE 100 business, and everything in between. And that means that you could have, could be people with just 4 people that work for them. But if they work for you, you are the most important person in their working life. And I think that everybody has the potential to lead. And I think leadership is something that can be taught and it can be learnt. And that's the fundamental premise of my book. Now, that doesn't mean that, like learning any skill, like if the example I always give is us 3 right now could decide we're all going to go and learn a new musical instrument, right? If we have good tuition, if we are prepared to learn, and if we work hard, in a year's time, we're all going to be dramatically better at that musical instrument, no matter what it is, than we are today. But first of all, if we don't do any of those 3 things, we won't improve. But second of all, it might turn out that one or other of us has some, great natural aptitude for that instrument, which will mean that they are better than the rest of us. But that doesn't mean we haven't all improved. And I think that's the point about leadership. It's not that some people aren't going to end up being better than others at it. They are, like anything. But I do think that everybody with the right guidance can improve, and improve quite dramatically. And the real determinants of how you improve at anything are not natural ability. They are quality of tuition, your preparedness to and willingness to take that tuition, and hard work.
We've stumbled into this quite nicely, because obviously we've got a big team and we've got people that want to get into that management position, and obviously you hear the phrase like a natural born leader. So I guess talking about that, are there any like natural predispositions that make people natural? What are some of the attributes that you're looking for in terms of those people that that if they were to fall into or go for that leadership role, that they'd be successful?
I genuinely don't know the answer to that, and I deliberately steered away in the book, from areas that I felt like that I wasn't qualified to comment on, but I do think, though, based on just my experience of the world and my experience in my career, that there isn't a leadership type, and we can see that because we've all worked for lots of different sorts of people in leadership positions, and we've worked for people who are good at it and people who are bad at it. And certainly I find it quite difficult to be able to draw a line through who as in a sort of plot a graph to say these are the people who are good at it and here's the people who are bad at it. What I'd say is that the people who are effective leaders, I mean, for me, I just said what I thought a leader is. A leader is anybody that has people they're responsible for. For me, leadership is the navigation of a group of people from a defined point in the present to a different and clearly defined point in the future. And leadership is a doing word. Leadership is always and entirely about people, and it is fundamentally about getting stuff done. That's what leadership is. Leadership is about the ability to take effective decisions, to define your start point, to define your end point, and take effective decisions to navigate between the two. Now, the skills that leaders have is you have to, of course, take people with you, and I think we probably can agree on. The thing is, no, I'm going to stop that. What I really try and avoid is those kind of big long lists of adjectives that people like to throw out when they talk about leaders and leadership, and I really resist doing that, because I think you can just keep going. You know, you can write. Anybody can pick. People say, "Well, do you think that I don't pick people? Leaders have to be. Leadership is all about empathy," and I go, "Well, if." No, it isn't all about empathy. No, it's about getting stuff done. Is it useful to be empathetic to be an effective leader? Yeah, it is. But there's a load of other things as well. And so I really steer away from those kind of lists of personality types. Partly because I mean, I'm not a social scientist or anything like that. Other people might be able to better qualified than me to define that, but. Yeah, I don't think it's about that. I don't think it's primarily about personality types.
Okay, that's interesting. So say there are people that maybe don't fall under the category of natural born leaders, and we're saying that leaders are made. For people that are listening that want to move into more of a leadership position, I mean, you might not want to comment on it, but where would be the best place to start in terms of those soft skills, or is there a ground which is best to kind of jump into straight away and say, actually, this is what I'm going to do to improve or to start or to kind of test the waters?
Well, I think the most important thing, if you're in a leadership position, if you have people that are responsible for you. If you have people that you are responsible for, I think the most important thing is that you have a point of view of your own on what leadership is. Now, it sounds like I'm dodging your question, but I think that, and I will come back and try and answer it, but I think that is the most important. And most people who are in leadership positions, I mean, most leaders aren't CEOs or generals or .com billionaires. By my definition, there are hundreds of thousands of people in leadership positions in the UK alone who probably don't think about themselves as being leaders and aren't recognised as such by the organisation they're in, and therefore, guess what? Many of them underperform and don't go ahead and fulfil their potential. So I think the first is, if you have people that you're responsible for, is to think about yourself as a leader, is to take up your authority and to say, in a working context, at least, I am the most important person in the working lives of the people that work for me, and I have a responsibility to those people. I have a responsibility. I think the way I think about it is I have a responsibility to make a positive impact on the careers and the working lives of those people. Now, that then requires me to do two things, I think. It requires me to be very clear with my team what it is we're all trying to achieve. And often, not kidding, often people aren't clear about that. I mean, they're really not. I mean, that is one of those questions that becomes really glaringly obvious, but it sometimes isn't. So first of all, is everybody really clear what they're collectively trying to achieve? Yes or no? Then is everybody that works for you clear what their part in that is? Are they clear what they need to do in order for them individually to be successful? Now, I think if you answer those two questions well, those are important questions to answer. That requires you to do quite a lot of stuff. That requires you to be able to define what it is you're trying to achieve. It also means you need to spend time with the people that work with you to understand both what they personally want to achieve from their career, and secondly, understand how you as their leader can help them fulfill that. And I think the dream in a team is that you get an alignment between the team fulfilling its collective ambition, which you as the leader at least partly responsible for setting, and the individuals within it fulfilling their own personal ambitions. And that isn't a complicated thing to do, but it is a difficult thing to do, and it takes time, and it probably requires difficult conversations sometimes, and a whole load of other things. But I think that taking up your authority, thinking about yourself as a leader, and having a clear view on what leadership is and how to go about doing it is the most important thing as a leader. And I've written a book to tell you what mine is. And of course I'd like you to agree with me, but the most important thing is not that you agree with me. The most important thing is you have one of your own, and if it's the same as mine, happy days.
I totally agree with you there. And I think it's so hard. Like, I think one of the biggest things that we've found since being leaders is, especially in a situation with setting up a business and maybe not so much having someone above you, there's no one I can't call daddy and say, what do I do? It's that muscle, that activating that muscle within you to actually be able to solve problems and think on your feet and those kind of things. And I think it's that stepping up in terms of becoming a leader, and maybe people that don't view themselves as a leader aren't activating that muscle and aren't thinking about the problems that they can solve and things like that. And it probably boils down to a confidence thing. And obviously the more you do something, the more confident that you're going to get.
It definitely is exactly. So it's a confidence thing, and that's why I try and avoid the lists of adjectives, because it's lots of things, but certainly confidence is one of those things. So yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about culture, but I think that really for a leader, again, so when I wrote the book, I wrote 3 definitions. So I, for myself, my own satisfaction, wrote 3 definitions. We've talked about a leader, we've talked about leadership, and the third was culture. And culture for me is the environment the leader creates in order for their team to outperform. That's in a organizational context. That's what culture is. And again, there's a vast amount of bullshit talked about culture, and the single most important determinant as to whether you have an effective culture or not is the leader. The leader of that group of people determines to a large part the culture that team that exists within that team. And primarily the culture is the behavior of the leader. So and we all see this because we've all seen people who've moved. We've probably experienced it ourselves. We've moved from team A to team B, or company A to company B, and that individual has gone from a 0 to a hero, or a hero to a 0, whichever way around it is. And the person is the same person. It's the culture that's changed. And I think the most potent thing effective leaders do is they create environments where people achieve things that they wouldn't otherwise achieve. That team achieves results that they wouldn't if they weren't there. No, but again, back to difficult but not complicated. I mean, if you're not doing that as a leader, if the team isn't performing better with you there, if you're not there, why are you there, right? I mean, it's funny when you say it out loud, but at the same time, we've all worked with plenty of people who you go, well, if they're not there, I'm not sure what doesn't get done. And effective leaders manage to get stuff done that wouldn't otherwise happen.
You said something before that was quite interesting. It was almost a 2-parter around a good leader is clear on the desired future and is clear on kind of the individual team members, how where they want to be as well, and how to get there. Yeah. So based on those two, is the culture almost a manifestation of those two things? So culture works really well when there's like a clear vision on where we want to be, how we get there, and what the outcomes are.
Yes, I think it is. I mean, culture, I think, is essentially a sort of an aggregation of behaviours, I think. And we talk a lot about authentic leaders, and kind of, again, I'm all for that as well. That's great as well. But I think also leadership, to an extent, is a bit of an act. I mean, as a leader, for you to create an effective culture, which is essentially a sort of set of behavioural norms, if you like, within the team, you have to give a kind of you have to be a curated version of yourself. I in my opinion, I mean, I think, let's say if you lose let's say you lose a really big client or a really big pitch or something like that, if you're the leader, you can't just go back into the office and sit with your head on the desk for 24 hours. Even if that's really how you feel, you can't do that. It's okay. I think the authenticity comes through from being, it's okay to acknowledge that that's a really horrible and unpleasant thing, but you have to be the person that says, right, here's how we're going to deal with that. Here's how we're going to turn that crisis into an opportunity. So I think that understanding of behaviours that enable people to achieve things they wouldn't otherwise achieve, I think is really, really important. When I was writing my new book, I reread Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, which is Ed Catmull was one of the co-founders of Pixar. So basically it's a sort of story of Pixar. And it's a book, it doesn't pitch itself like this, but it's essentially a book about culture. It's a book about a leadership group continually and permanently obsessed about what their actual culture is and the ways in which it enables and hinders people from achieving things they wouldn't otherwise achieve. And they're sort of permanent. It's like they're painting the fourth rail bridge. Their permanent battle to minimize the ways the culture gets in the way and maximize the ways that the culture accelerates or enables. And I think that leaders who take that seriously, on the whole, will outperform.
That's interesting. It brings up, this wasn't a written down point, but it's actually something that me and Jack have debated, not with our own team, but sometimes with other teams that we work alongside externally. It's this idea that because culture is so important and almost the top of every LinkedIn post at the moment is something about culture.
Yeah.
There's almost this thing happening at the moment of people are afraid to discipline certain people within the business that probably need to be disciplined or have those tough conversations because they think that person is almost like a cultural hinge on the business. Like the culture is not just around the leader, it could be around the most impactful members of the team. So what are your thoughts on avoiding tough conversations because of a fear of how it will damage the culture in the long run?
Wow, that's one of my favourite topics. I think that effective cultures, one of the most important characteristics of effective cultures is how they is their ability to communicate. The people within it, the ability of the people within it to communicate effectively with each other, and that's definitely not. And in fact, this is a major point in Catmull's book. This is definitely not just a top-down hierarchy. I mean, the person at the top telling people who work for them what to do isn't effective communication. I mean, it's like that's just the most basic. That's just a basic process of explaining to people what it is you're trying to achieve. Effective cultures have effective communication in all directions. And one of the things you have to watch out for is hierarchy. You need hierarchy in organizations because you just do. You need, otherwise it's just chaos. But the problem with hierarchy is it gets in the way of effective communication. So you need to create a kind of a porous hierarchy. So there's not many. In my experience, there aren't many organizations that really do create a culture where everybody is free and feels enabled to speak up. Speak upwards and downwards through the hierarchy. And yet, if you're going to be a high-performing organization, you really do need to encourage people to do that. In terms to your point, I think that culture is, like I said, culture is an aggregation of behaviors. And as a leader, you need to decide. And in fact, without being an overt plug, in my new book, I do spell out more explicitly than in the first one what I think the defining characteristics of a great culture are. But it is an aggregation of behaviors, and what is important is that those behaviors apply to everybody. They can't just be behaviors that, if you really do think, which would make sense to me, if you really do think, we're going to be an organisation that is able to that is good at having difficult conversations with itself, that seems to me a good cultural behaviour. Then that has to apply to everybody. It can't just apply to some people some of the time, because a culture is only as strong as its weakest link. And I think one of the big barriers in organizations is the tension between short-term financial gain, or what it may not always be financial, but but let's call it that for now. Short-term financial gain and culture, essentially. Because sometimes you find yourself in a position where you go, I know that we said that these are the things that matter to us, but oh my God, that client over there, that person running that piece of business over there, we all know they're a bit of a dick, but the client really likes them, and therefore we sort of have to let them get on with it and suck it up. And we've all been in those positions, and in the book I publish a grid that isn't my grid. It was by a famous US CEO called Jack Welch. And he said basically that the people who don't get us, so i.e. aren't a good cultural fit, but do deliver results, and they're the biggest challenge in anybody who's taking culture seriously. He said our organizations only started to change when we removed those people. And I think it's a really important point. It is a manifestation of a principle is not a principle till it costs you money. But of course, Jack Welch was an extremely hard-nosed businessman. I got several very, very unpleasant one-star reviews for my book only because I'd mentioned Jack Welch in it. So he's a polarizing figure. But what he's saying is that short term that might cause you a problem, but long term, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. Long term, our business will perform better. Ultimately by removing those people who refuse or unwilling and refuse to fit with the behaviours that you've said in this organisation are those that matter most to you. If you continue to indulge those people, you will never change, and if you never change, you'll never achieve the thing you want to achieve in the medium to long term. So it is it isn't a soft squishy thing, culture. It isn't Pilates at lunchtime and free fruit. It really is the thing that determines whether your team's going to outperform your competitors, which at the end of the day is what we're all trying to do.
There was something you said there, Chris, that I love, and I think when we do podcasts like this, there's always like a moment, and it was, you said that a company is only as strong as its weakest link, which I think is beautiful, and it is something very important to remember. So in the situation where the weakest link is the leader, obviously that brings
that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, that's a big problem. And so I was talking to somebody recently, and they'd had a really bad, we're talking years and years ago, but they'd had a really bad leader who had really affected the culture of a sales company in terms of like KPIs and feeling nervous, not being able to speak up and things like that. They realised the issue with the leadership. They got rid of it to try and solve that. But they still felt like some of the issues around culture existed even after getting rid of the weakest link. So how easy, if you're for a long-standing business or something like, or say we had this podcast and we had an epiphany and we're like, right, we need to go and change our culture completely. How easy is it for a company to change that culture even after maybe the leadership has changed hands?
Well, it depends what you mean by easy. So it's easy. I think it is quite easy in the sense that you can achieve quite a lot quite quickly. I think it isn't necessarily easy in the sense that, you have to do some, quite difficult things, and the most, let's face it, difficult things in virtually every business really are things related to people. You have to do some pretty difficult things to get there. But I think the best way to think about culture is, or not the best, the way I think about it is, I think about it like concrete. Like if you lay a path, okay, in concrete, right, and you mark out with wood, you set the frame for the shape you want the concrete to take, and you pour the concrete in, and the concrete is wet, and so it's liquid, so it fills the shape of the mold, whatever that mold is, and you can sign your name in it with a stick and all that sort of stuff. But in time, that concrete sets. And that's what happens with culture. And if you want to change that culture, you have to smash it. You have to take hard physical actions to do so. And so I think you can change culture quite quickly, but you have to take quite dramatic, I suppose, action to do that. And by that, what I mean is, first of all, most organizations, and I think I can say that safely, if not the large majority of organizations, don't really know what the culture is in the organization. They pay the leadership industrial complex to go and do some massive off-site blah blah blah, and they come up with some values, and nearly everybody comes up with the same values. And then they put them on the website, and that's it. They go, okay, we've done that, and that's got nothing at all to do with the culture, right? So first of all, whether you manage 4 people or 1,000 people, you should have a view on what the actual culture is today. And to do that, you're going to have to be sort of inventive. It's not that difficult to do. You can do surveys, one-on-one interviews, focus groups, whatever. It's not difficult to do. But you need to have some sort of vaguely robust view on what the culture is today. And you also need to have a point of view on what you'd like it to be. What do you think is the culture that you need? What are the behaviours? Bear in mind, that's primarily what culture is. What are the behaviours you think the people in your team should have in order for that team to, to perform well? And I think what people often try and do is they try and come up with really clever answers to that question. I don't think the answers need to be very clever. I think the answers can be quite obvious and quite straightforward. It's just doing them that's really difficult, and kind of enforcing them and holding each other to account to them. So the first is, I think, have an honest conversation about what it is. The second is have an honest conversation about what you'd like to be, and just doing that honestly puts you, if you do that properly, puts you ahead of many teams and many organizations. But then you have to smash the concrete. And what I think you need to do is create a sense of newness. If you're saying we are going to change this culture, you can't change anything really by sending a few emails out or having a kind of a quiet private meeting that only 3 people go to and talk about it and then come back out and hope everything's going to be different. You have to have a collective conversation that says, this isn't where we want to be, this is why it isn't where we want to be, this is where we're going to get to. And then you set about, I think, breaking people's habits and routines. That's the first thing. Just get people to feel like Monday is going to be different to Friday. And you can do that doing some, again, relatively easy things, where people sit, where regular meetings are held, what the shape of, what the shape of key committees and key boards are. I mean, there's a whole, there's a whole list. Again, I expand on this more actually because it's about change. I expand on this more in my new book, but it's really about breaking routines. A lot of what we do at work and in life, because otherwise we couldn't function if we didn't, we do almost subconsciously. We do on sort of autopilot. And because if we had to think about every single thing, we'd be overwhelmed. But when you're trying to create change, you sort of have to push the unconscious into the conscious. You have to force people to just think, okay, we've said we're going to be different. We've said we're not happy where we are. We've said we're going to get to somewhere else. We're not there yet. But in order to do that, we've got to smash away all the habits and behaviours and routines, as many as we feel like we can, in order to give yourselves an opportunity to pour in some fresh, wet concrete. But you've got to smash that first one out first. And then, you know, once you create that space, then culture is the behaviour of leaders. I mean, the best way is to absolutely hold yourself to account to those behaviours, hold other people to account to them, and make sure other people can hold you to account to them as well. Because, you know, we're human. You don't have to be perfect. It's ridiculous. Nobody's going to be perfect. But you have to be sincere. That's a long answer, sorry.
No, it's a great answer. It's a great answer. There's so many different ways we could go from that. I think one of the things that you were kind of alluding to there as part of that was, it's almost like culture it's a collaborative piece. You know, you build it with everyone involved, and yet it sounds like most businesses are actually dictating the terms of, here's what we want the culture to be. But
I don't think they're even doing that. I think they're on autopilot. I just don't think they think about it. They have a sort of a slightly illusory view of what culture is. The people at the top do, because they're in their little bubble at the top, and they just give it no more thought. It's
strange, but obviously with people like yourself writing books that are much clearer on what things are and why they should be that way. Hopefully that should change.
Hopefully.
So last point for you, Chris, that I wanted to. There was a few others in here, but I think this is a useful one as kind of a bit of a takeaway. So I know that in the book you're big on having a diverse skill set and things working well when that diverse skill set is married to one kind of shared goal. Are you, from your experience, is there any skill sets that commonly are overlooked in businesses where investment's not taking place that it should be?
I mean, it's pretty tough to generalise, I would say. I think I think it's pretty tough to generalize on skill sets, because different businesses and different industries and different jobs require different things. I think if I had to pick one thing from a leadership point of view, I'm actually going to pick two. I'm going to pick two. I'm going to pick communication. Because the more I think about it, the more important effective communication within an organization is in terms of achieving the kind of culture that you need. And that is, and in itself, that's a cultural point. You know, effective cultures are good at having effective conversations with each other, and you could say it's chicken and egg. Is it a good culture because they created an environment where people could have effective conversations, or the other way around? It doesn't really matter. Let's not get hung up on it. But I think earlier on, one of you mentioned having difficult conversations. I mean, I think that effective organisations have to be good. And effective leaders have to be good at creating environments where people can have difficult conversations, and those difficult conversations. You know, I always think that the good teams are able to disagree without falling out, and otherwise, because if this stuff isn't being said, it doesn't mean it's not being thought. You know, the fact that people can't say something doesn't mean they don't believe it or think it. It just means that people lock it away, and that's when you get to resentment, you get to politics, you get to all that horrible stuff that you don't want, of course, which always exists to some extent. But the more you are able to create an environment where people really can have difficult conversations with each other, and good conversations, and all sorts of effective conversations with each other, I think that is really, really important and unlocks so much. You know, that sort of cliche about good ideas can come from anywhere. Well, you know, yeah, they can, but but they won't unless you create an environment to enable that to happen. And that, like anything done well, that requires effort. That you can't just send an email and say it's okay to have difficult conversations with each other. I mean, that's not going to change anything. You've got to think as a leader, okay, what forums, what behaviors, blah, 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 do I need to put in place to enable that to happen? So I think effective communication on one hand. So if you like, I talk about, I wrote my leadership equation. Leadership impact equals clarity multiplied by action. So let's say clarity is part one, and the second is action. And so I think the second is being an effective decision maker, and having a culture that's an effective decision making culture. Leaders. For me, a decision is a choice that you take when you're uncertain of the outcome. If you're certain of the outcome, it's not a decision. I mean, if you know that if you turn right, it's going to be absolutely brilliant, and turn left is going to drive off a cliff, it's not a decision, is it? So a decision, by definition, is a choice taken when you're uncertain about the outcome. And if you're uncertain about the outcome, that means that sometimes the outcome isn't going to be what you expect. It's like baked in. That's just inevitable. Inevitably, some decisions are not going to work out how you expect them to. Some decisions are going to work out really badly. But you cannot move from A to B, which is what leadership is about. You cannot, full stop, triple underline, cannot move between those two places unless you as a leader, and preferably your team you're responsible for, are effective decision makers. And that means you have to be able to take good decisions at an appropriate pace, and understand and expect, frankly, that failure or error, because getting a decisions not working out how you expect doesn't always mean failure and doesn't always mean error. But nevertheless, error and failure are embedded features of success. It is absolutely impossible to achieve anything worthwhile without error along the way. And the only way you avoid error is by not taking decisions. And if you don't take decisions, you don't act, and therefore you fail. So it's a virtuous circle. So effective leaders have to be effective, prompt, efficient decision makers. And unless you're a very small organization, perhaps, if you're an organization of 20 people, you probably can centralize quite a lot of decision making. But if you're an organization much bigger than that, and you want to maximize your potential, you have to be an organization that is able to essentially decentralize decision making. So by that, what I mean is, a lot of organizations talk about being agile, being nimble, but they don't really talk about what are the behaviors, the cultural behaviors they need to embed in order to be agile and nimble. Well, for me, what you have to do is you have to be able to take decisions at a distance from the center without reference back to the center. If every decision you have to take, if every significant decision that the organization takes has to flow back to the center, that might work for you as an organization, fine, but you won't be an agile organization. I mean, you have to decide what matters most to you. So that I think is the only way you can really be an agile organization, and that puts an extra challenge on leaders, because first of all, that means that not only do they have to be effective, efficient decision makers themselves, they and accept that some stuff isn't going to work out how they thought it might. They have to also accept, and that applies to the people at a distance from them that work for them as well, that those people also will make decisions without reference back to them that don't work out quite how they expect. But that's the only way. I think that and again, all of these points eventually lead back to culture. Again, it's a point about culture.
It's great. And I actually, that point that you were just making then, when I was reading your book, I messaged Jack about saying, I think that's one of the things that's perhaps helped us this year unconsciously in our first year as a proper business, in terms of we can make decisions so quickly because we're not going for that paralysis by analysis thing that you seem to see when there's that complex leadership. It seems to be, let's look at every possible outcome rather than just finding the 30-40% and saying that's enough. Let's actually go and act on it now.
I think that is the honestly, it is the only way. And I think that lead. We talked, I think, earlier about confidence, and one of the things that gives leaders confidence when you're leading, there's the things you can control and the things you can't. And the things you can't control is a far bigger list. It's a huge list of things you can't control. And sometimes those things are very painful. They have very painful real world effects on you, but you can't control them. What you can do, I think, as a leader is you have to understand what are the things that are within your power that you can control. And you know that there are some commonalities, of course. There's a whole lot of people and cultural things, but there'll be other stuff that are sort of role specific. But nevertheless, there's the things that you can control. The way you either build or, if you don't do it, erode confidence. You know, confident teams are teams that feel like they are able to, through an understanding of the things that are within their control, that they are able to navigate the external storms. That, you know, that's what effectively it is. It's like being a sailing ship, right? If you're a cork on an ocean, then you get pushed hither and thither by the winds, the storms, the tide. You just bob around on the ocean. If you're in a sailing ship, the tides and the winds and the storms are still there, but if you're an effective captain, you're able to navigate yourself between your start point and your end point. Of course, it won't be a straight line because of all those other factors, but you're able to control that is within your your gift to do so. And good, effective leaders do that well, and that is, I think, one of the most effective ways to build confidence in yourself and within your team. You know, your ability to take effective decisions related to the factors that are within your control and influence your results as a consequence. That is how you build confidence. And we all know from bitter personal experience the opposite, where we've worked for leaders who don't do that, who aren't effective decision makers. We've all sat in teams, leadership team meetings, where you discuss the same problem every week, and it erodes the team's confidence so quickly, because you very rapidly conclude as a team that you're not able to control events. And as a leader and as a team, you have to believe that you can at least, you can't control the things that are beyond your control, but you can shape your destiny by being able to control those that are within your remit.
Perfect. What an answer to finish on. Superb. Thanks so much, Chris.
No problem.
So I'll put a link to the book, No Bullshit Leadership. I really, really mean it when I say I've really thoroughly enjoyed it, and would advise anyone in any leadership position, not even running a company, or maybe with ambitions to go into leadership, maybe you're a sales manager, to check it out. There's so many actionable takeaways. Is there anything else that you would want people to be aware of? Any speaking? I know you've got your new book's going to be coming out shortly. Anything you'd like us to plug?
I don't think there's anything else. No, I really appreciate your kind words. Thank you very much. It's a book that is intended to be relevant to everybody, and I hope that it is. And the new book's out in June, I believe. So maybe I'll come back on then. We'll talk about that.
Perfect. We could do this all day. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks so much,
Chris,
for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it. Have a good day.